Hey everybody, I'm Brian. I'm the chair of the Roanoke Valley Libertarians. We meet on the second Wednesday of each month, usually at Corned Beef and Company, but this month, because we had a special guest speaker, we met at R.T. Smith's Deli. And I just want to make sure I got that right. But it's R.T. Smith's Deli. It's 10 Campbell Avenue here in Roanoke, Virginia. So if you're ever out and you want pork roll or roast beef or cheese or whatever, please go there and give them a little love. But like I said, the Roanoke Valley Libertarians, we meet on the second Wednesday of each month. And this month we had Maat speak to us. He is the first individual that has said that he is seeking the nomination from the Libertarian Party for president in 2024. You can find out more about Mike at his website, MikeTermott.com, or you can go to agoldnewdeal.org, and you'll be able to read about him. You'll be able to read about his positions and all that good stuff. So there we go. Sit back and listen to Mike Termott tell us why we should support him. And
okay, so once again, this is Mike Termott. He's the first person to declare his plan to seek the nomination from the LP for president in 2024. He's here today to tell us about the goldnewdeal.org. You can see that out of his platform, and he's going to tell you. And then if you want to ask him any questions, please go ahead, and after he gets done.
I'll speak fast so we can get to questions. Yeah. I noticed you're a very shy group and you don't like to talk, so I'm glad I don't have to carry the whole day myself. What haven't we already talked about? The big thing that I want to bring as a message to you all is that I believe that we have a huge opportunity in 2024. The party does. And that's for a couple of different reasons. And one might argue that we've had opportunities in the past, but I think 2024 represents a bigger opportunity than ever before. And that's for a couple of very specific different reasons. One is, I believe that people are increasingly in the United States, American voters are beginning to realize that a lot of our problems are linked to bad public policy. I think that's something that we as libertarians would say that we've recognized for a long, 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 long time. And many, many Americans will not wake up to that idea for a long more time. But I would argue that increasingly people are able to recognize they didn't like the COVID regime. People in increasing proportion understand that inflation is caused by the Fed and by federal government spending, and they're able to connect those dots. I think people are able to look at our militaristic interventions around the world and realize that that is bad public policy on steroids, and that people are increasingly unhappy about that, and people increasingly recognize that ethics aside when it comes to war, which is kind of a weird thing to say, especially as a libertarian, but if we can just set the ethics aside for a moment about war, about which we would all agree, it is increasingly difficult to make the case the United States is on a strategic level even good at it. Tactically, we're very good at it, right? We're very good at taking ground, blowing things up, and killing people. We're not particularly good at achieving strategic objectives that most Americans would look back on and say, that was a good idea, that was worth it, I'm glad we did that. And you don't have to be as old as you and I are to remember Vietnam. We've had plenty of examples even since then. So the United States is not going in the right direction as far as federal public policy or even state public policy in the vast majority of cases. And I think people are increasingly connecting those dots. The other reason I think it's a huge opportunity is because people are increasingly dissatisfied with their political parties. If I can draw a distinction between public policy in general and economic problems, COVID problems, and foreign policy problems, and the parties themselves. Now, we can all argue about why the parties have gone in the directions they have. A big turning point was the introduction of sort of a bifurcation in how we get our news in this country with cable news, right? Increasingly, people are able to recognize people on the other side of the aisle, metaphorically speaking, as being worth a damn. People just don't like other people in the United States anymore who have different political views than they do. That is a fairly recent phenomenon. Yes, my grandparents made fun of my mother for being a Democrat, but it was sort of in good jest 20 and 40 years ago. Now, people honestly don't want their daughter to marry someone in the other party, and they're very serious about it. And what that has led to is each party has adopted as its number one objective, I would argue, keeping the other party out of power, as opposed to the platforms that they used to pursue. You and I remember when the Republican Party was at least allegedly fiscally conservative. At least they would claim to pursue it, right? Now they clearly don't pursue it and rarely even claim to do so. Their big shtick is keeping the Democrats out of power, and it's the same thing from the Democratic point of view, right? They're much more into cancel culture than they are, and keeping Republicans out of power and people that they don't agree with out of power, than they are in pursuing any sort of protection for your First Amendment rights or any of your other rights. This is a relatively recent phenomenon, and people are sick of it. Not completely, obviously, but increasingly so. The Republican Party is obviously split with Trump. The Democratic Party is about to be split over their incumbent president, both of which are very strange phenomena. But no matter how strange we think it might be, it is unfortunately reality. Or, for the Libertarian Party, selfishly speaking, not so unfortunate. It is a huge opportunity for us. Having said that, I do believe that we can screw this up. I think that we have proven in the past that we can screw this up. And I think that there's a couple of categories in which we're most liable to do so, most likely to do so. One is through what I would call weak messaging. And I don't mean to sound like, Joe Radical, but I think it's hard to argue that our messaging was successful 2 years ago or 6 or 10 years ago. I'm probably going to sound a little bit critical of our past campaigns, and I don't mean it personally. The governor seemed like a nice guy, a smart guy. Everyone said he was a successful governor in New Mexico. I wasn't there for those years. I'll have to take people's word for it. It's not personal. And Jo Jorgensen specifically, I think she's a lovely person. She's been nice to me. I try to be nice to her. She seems like a libertarian. She seems fairly smart. This isn't personal, right? And by the way, anyone say anything bad about Spike Cohen, we're going to fight in the hallway, okay? I thought I should throw that out there. Having said that, I think Spike would agree that messaging was not handled in a very effective manner 2 years ago. Obviously, we missed the boat on taking advantage of the COVID regime. That's easy to say looking back. I'm going to try to give her the benefit of the doubt and say, I'm sure they were caught like deer in the headlights. They didn't know which way this thing was going to go, and if it turns out to be the Andromeda strain, this is an old movie, ask your parents, then you don't want to be the one that looks like you didn't take it seriously. I get that. Having said that, a little bit of courage would have paid off enormously. Spike told her so and was shunned. Okay. But it's not about the specifics. It's about sort of a gut check and what it is that you feel needs to be done to garner attention. Go back to the governor 4 years earlier. Again, nothing personal, but if your message is, and so I sometimes get this wrong, so work with me. If your message is, I'm fiscally conservative like a Republican and socially liberal like a Democrat, I think I got that right. You actually don't have a message. You've just told us you have no message. You've told us you're a little bit like one party, a little bit like another party, and so I've got no reason to be here, right? I'm not going to bring anything new, almost definitionally, right? I've defined myself in terms of overlap with the other parties. I'm offering nothing new. If you hate the Republicans, you hate the Democrats, a little bit each, you can hate me completely. I suppose. There's another way to look at the other side of the coin. So again, nothing personal, but he gave no one a reason to back him. And I would argue that when he forgot that Aleppo was the name of a town in Syria, an honest mistake, anyone can make the mistake. In fairness, it's okay for you or I to make that mistake. It's not okay if you're running for president. But having said that, the reason it was such a big deal is because he didn't have a backing. No one rallied around him. It was just off the cliff, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember Donald Trump famously said, I could probably shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and I wouldn't lose much support? I probably got the quote kind of wrong, but that's the idea, right? Okay, well, I gotta say that forgetting the name of a town in Syria is not as bad as shooting someone on Fifth Avenue. Donald Trump could have forgotten that Syria existed, right? But he gave people a reason to back him. I'm not suggesting that we should be supporting Donald Trump. He's given us plenty of reasons to dislike him, that swamp the reasons that he has given us to back him. But having said that, you get the point. There was no one to rally around Gary. So the first time he made a mistake, gone. The reason he was given so much attention, at least in the beginning, was because he was viewed as credible. Public policy background, public service, he walked the walk, he talked the talk. The fact that he had no messaging was a problem, but the media appreciated that he was a credible threat. Which brings me to the second category of things I think we could go wrong. We have to understand that America expects certain things out of a campaign. A certain level of professionalism and a certain amount of traditionalism, which saddens me. But having said that, I don't mean in terms of public policy, but how you conduct the campaign. There has to be a certain amount of professionalism. They expect a certain background. They expect a certain commitment to public policy, which I think was a real problem for Joe to overcome. As wonderful as I may think she is, or you may think she is, in fairness, people are correct. She's an industrial psychologist and an academic trying to run for president of the United States. There's a mismatch. And the media had a hard time getting past that. And they didn't agree with her philosophy anyway, so why would they even work at getting past those things? And that's a big reason why I'm running. Not because I think that I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread. By the way, if you haven't tried the Southwest, it's awesome, okay? So just a plug. Try the Southwest next time. It's not because I'm so great, but I do believe that I can help push the party's nomination process in that direction. More professionalism, a greater reverence, if not commitment, to public policy and public service. These things matter. We tend to downplay them inside of our party because we tend to be anti-government, and any number of people inside the party identify as anarchists. We know what people mean by that. Outside of our party, that's a scary term. Sometimes inside the party it can be a scary term, but certainly outside the party it's a scary term. And we need to recognize the American public expects a little bit of commitment to public service and professionalism and TV. TV ads, for example. Our campaigns in the past have raised millions of dollars. Having said that, if you're on a bus going from town to town in the year 2020, you're not actually running for president, in my view. You may think you are, but you're not. You may be doing something great and something wonderful and spreading the message and touching people and getting a lot of good things done. But the American public does not look at that and say you're running for president. They just don't. Stay at home, stay on the couch. Joe Biden did it and he won. Spend your money on television ads. I wish this weren't the world in which we live, but it is. And no amount of wishing otherwise is going to change that. If you have $300,000 in the bank, you're doing something wrong. You need to spend it now, by 5 o'clock. You don't take $8 million and say, well, I've got 16 weeks, that's $500,000 a week, I'll spend it this way, and I'll pull into the station at the end with zero. There is no advantage to flaming out in 8 weeks or in 16 weeks instead of flaming out in an hour. If you're going to lose, do it hard and fast, because that's the only chance you have to win. You need to build up momentum in the beginning and get the message out. Remember the reason that we're in the presidential campaign at all in the first place. Up until now, we have never thought that we could actually win. The reason we do it is to spread the message, most especially so that local campaigns can get better traction. I ran for Congress last year in I guess it was the 5th bluest district in the United States in Broward County. Everyone's a Democrat. The ideas that we're putting out there, it was the first time most people even heard these ideas. I had a newspaper editor ask me to explain school choice because he didn't get it, not because he wanted my views on it. It was a "what do you mean by that" conversation. Well, you mean private schools would have access to, like the state would give money to the private schools? It's like, wow. I mean, is this a high school, lecture course? Or am I being interviewed to try to get the Sun Sentinel endorsement? Obviously, I didn't get the Sun Sentinel endorsement, right? If our millions of dollars, as paltry as they are compared to the kind of money that the Republicans bring in and the Democrats bring in, if our millions of dollars had been spent on television ads explaining to people that you have an alternative and here's what it looks like, right? Anti-war and sound money, the bread and butter issues. We don't have to think too far outside of our own box here. We all know what the messages need to be. If we had done that, then our local candidates wouldn't find themselves for the first time having to explain to an editor of the Sun Sentinel how school choice would work. Like, what? You get my point. Having said that, we do say sometimes dumb things, which brings me to what I view as the third category of things that we can do wrong. And in the past, I don't think we've done as much of it as I think we're starting to. And that's saying dumb things. We sometimes step on our own message. Our caucus sometimes does dumb things in this regard, right? Obviously, New Hampshire was an example. And I don't think that any party or caucus or even local party should be held to account for a few comments made by a couple of people that should have had their mouth closed. I get that. So I don't want to blow that out of proportion. But we sometimes as a group don't handle certain issues really well. And we have a history of being defined incorrectly, let me use that word. The biggest example, I would argue, would be in the, as recently as the 90s, and maybe even more recent than that, people viewed our party as the weed party, right? We need to draw a hard distinction between being anti-prohibition and pro-weed. Otherwise, people think that it's just self-serving. You just want cheap weed. And I do, and I do want cheap weed. Okay, I'll give you that. But having said that, that's not the reason we fight prohibition, right? Ron Paul on television famously asked the crowd, how many people here would try heroin if it were legalized? No one is going to raise their hand. Not only because it would be embarrassing, but because no one would. It's not. People don't try drugs because they're legal. They just don't. I know this because people don't avoid drugs because they're illegal. I wish they would sometimes, right? If the war on drugs worked, at least we could have a conversation. But both reality, the practicality, and the ethics of the situation are on the same side of the argument, right? Anyway, having said that, there are ways that we can step on our own message. We can't be seen as pro-Second Amendment because we like to, shoot things and open carry and look cool and make videos of us shooting balloons in the desert. As much as I like to do those things, that can't be the reason. We can't be seen as, let me come up with some examples of our inventory of dumb things we do sometimes. We can't be seen as pro-First Amendment because we have a problem with racism, right? We can't let people position us as tolerant of racism, and that's why we're pro-First Amendment. No. We're pro-First Amendment, so you can say any stupid thing you want. That's why we may be in certain situations tolerant of people expressing racist views, right? Instead of the government cracking down on them. That's not the same thing as us saying we're tolerant of we can tolerate, we have a warm spot in our heart for racism. We don't. It's incompatible with the way we see the world. But your right to say such a dumb thing is completely compatible with the way we see the world. And those two things are very, very different. But if you're not careful, you see where I'm going. We have to be very, very careful. And sometimes we're sloppy. Sometimes we're sloppy. And that's a problem. And I think we're increasingly sloppy today compared to how we were sloppy 4 years ago. Now we just tend to get a little bit sloppier as the years go by, I think, and we need to tighten up a little bit in our professionalism. I don't mean it's an existential threat to our existence, but it could be. It could be. It only if instead of forgetting the name of a Syrian town, we made some remark that positioned us incorrectly. Could be a big deal, right? So anyway, there's a few categories of the ways that I think that we could do this wrong, and a big reason why I'm campaigning is to try to help us avoid those things. Whether I'm the right nominee or someone else, I'm trying to push us in that direction. Does that make any sense at all? So I think that we need to lead with policy. And I think that we need to lead with policy that is boldly different from what the other parties offer. Yes, I'm pushing what I see as the Gold New Deal. GoldNewDeal.org. If you go to GoldNewDeal.com, they'll try to sell you gold, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a different thing. Okay. It's a 12-point plan. There's a lot of libertarian bread and butter in there, but a little bit edgier and bolder than what we have traditionally been comfortable pushing. And I believe that that's okay for a couple reasons. One is that most of the stuff on there that's a little bit bold is stuff that I'm personally comfortable in my personal wheelhouse, which is not to say my wheelhouse includes everything, because it doesn't, right? But having been a professional economist for a couple of decades, I'm perfectly comfortable saying we can live without the Fed. That's not something I like to hear out of every mouth in the world, because I don't think everyone can back that up. But I do believe that we can sunset the Fed if done carefully in its component parts, replace it with a monetary policy that makes sense, a regulatory structure that makes sense, including letting banks go without regulation if they should choose to do so. I don't think that they would. Talk about that later. This is just one little example. That some of the things are a little bit edgy, but that we could back up. And in the case of End the Fed as an example, I think people are more ready to hear a little bit of that than they would have been 10 years ago, if you know what I mean. Because of the bad inflation that we're experiencing, I think people are ready to hear a little bit of that. The first time they hear that, there's going to be a little bit of, but that's where we got to go. And the reason I believe this so is because I think that we need to give people a reason to see us differently from the other parties. We need to cleave hard edges against the Republican Party, not look for overlap. And cleave hard edges against the Democratic Party. There is overlap, but that's not what we should be seeking out and hanging our hat on, right? If all three parties agree on something, why would you spend a lot of energy talking about that? To make yourself sound safer, or more useless, or less interesting, less viable, more of a waste of time. The other parties don't do that. The other parties are trying to kill each other. I'm not suggesting that we go quite that route either, right? But we should be finding areas where we can differentiate ourselves. By the way, back to Gary's, I'm fiscally conservative like a Republican and socially liberal like a Democrat. I don't know why I have a hard time saying that. Not only is it bad campaigning tactics, it's not even true. It's not even true. He was lying to those poor people. We're not fiscally conservative like a Republican, who aren't even fiscally conservative at all, right, by the way. But even in the days when they were trying to be, would a Republican tell you that taking money away from citizens and spending it on military interventions around the world was evil? No, they wouldn't have told you that. That's for us to tell people. If we don't say it, nobody will, apparently. That needs to be said. By the way, given some of the directions that the country is going, try to remember, I think we all need to remember this, that in a philosophical sense, we are the descendants of the people who founded this country. It's not just an opportunity. It's an obligation. We are not trying to campaign successfully because it would make us feel good. If we don't, we're letting down our fellow Americans. I know that sounds a little melodramatic, but it's the truth. We're not doing this for us. We're especially not doing it for you and me, maybe the youngsters, but we're doing it because we care about other people, other Americans. And by the way, people outside of the United States too. I feel like we need a fundamental change in our relationship with our government, and a fundamental change in the relationship between state governments and the federal government. And yeah, a fundamental change in the relationship between our federal government and the rest of the world. The rest of the world has had it up to here with our military. I'm waiting for that to backlash, because it already has in a lot of places around the world. I've been in well over 30 countries myself, and I can tell you a lot of them don't have any problem at all voicing their distaste for the way we see and treat the rest of the world. And I'm sort of waiting for the backlash from the rest of the world. And I worry about that. I think that we need to exit NATO. I think that we need to make it much more difficult for us to go to war. I would require every military intervention to have a declaration of war, and every declaration of war to be backed up by a vote of the states. If you can't get a majority of the states, and I would make it 2/3, if you can't get a majority of the states to say this is a good idea, maybe it's not. If you can't survive that vote, what are you doing? It shouldn't be the White House's job to convince us. It should be the White House's job to hold us off, right? It seems to me that if I were in the White House, I wouldn't go to war until there was picketing in the streets, demanding that we go to, not the other way around. If you're trying to sell it, that's sick. That's a little messed up if you think about it. I don't want to be on that side of the argument. Like convincing my fellow Americans that we need to, I'm trying to convince you that you need to, I'll still be here, by the way. I'll be downstairs in the Situation Room. You, and thank you, you are going to go do it because I think it's a good idea, and now I'm going to shove it down your throat. That's not healthy. And I think the rest of the world is increasingly seeing that. And I worry about that in the long run. Libertarians are not isolationists. And again, we need to avoid stepping on our own message and being positioned as such. We want to engage with the rest of the world. Personally, I believe that greater engagement with the rest of the world makes the rest of the world richer and the United States wealthier. And that's all self-serving and all wonderful, but it's not isolationist. There's a big difference. So these are the things that I worry about. And these are the reasons why I think it's important that we participate in the campaign and to do it right. Like I say, it's not just an opportunity, it's an obligation. What do you all think? Anything give you a heartburn?
Yeah, I think a lot of what you have to say is need to be said for a long time, quite frankly. Our messaging does suck. And no matter how hard you try to message right, there's always going to be somebody that's trying to tear that message down. And we shouldn't be beating each other up. Brian says it really well. He says we're black belts at kicking each other, libertarians, at kicking each other in the ass.
And other places.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And, you know, that's just unacceptable in our party. And the more you try to do good for people, I try to do when I was in XCOM and in the CD chairs.
Yeah.
The more I try, the more people backlash against me in my own party. Like, why is that like that? Why are we stepping on each other's feet? And it angers me because a lot of what happened with this whole situation angers me because we should have saw coming. And the messaging was somebody doesn't. Our party has a problem with if they don't like one message, they're going to do whatever they can do to that message.
Yeah.
It's our biggest problem. One of our biggest problems.
You know, it's really interesting because as split as the other parties get, right, they all have their infighting and backbiting and chest stabbing. In Washington, we used to say a true friend is someone who will stab you in the chest. It's a weird expression. As much as the parties have their infighting, they do rally around each other for elections. Would you agree with that?
Yep.
And I don't think that we do that very well. It's not my job to run down the other candidates, so I'm not going to. But I will mention, we have one guy who's going to be running, who openly talks about not having voted for our party last time, who openly endorsed a Republican last week, even though there was a Libertarian in the same race. I got a problem with that. And I can appreciate why. I can appreciate the why behind both of those things, by the way. I mean, I was frustrated with the campaign. I mean, I can see why someone wouldn't have voted for our party. And I can see why someone didn't like something in particular that was said by the Libertarian candidate. I see all the why. Shut the hell up.
Yeah.
That's how you handle it. I'm out. Right? I saw this. I didn't like it. I'm not going to be able to endorse our candidate. I'm going to shut up. I'm out. It's that sort of thing that drives me crazy. You're either in our party or you're not. That doesn't mean you have to go crazy and raise money for every single candidate. We have 400 local candidates running right now. That's quite a few. Yeah. They're not all in this county. I mean, all over the United States.
It'd be nice if they were here.
It'd be nice if 4 of them were here, right? Yeah. So no, you got plenty to choose from. You don't have to back them all. But why are we endorsing one of our competitors? That just makes us look dumb. The other thing that makes us look dumb, and again, I'm not here to run down the other candidates. I don't like the idea of nominating, as much as I personally liked Gary Johnson. He had a lot of positions that I couldn't stand, and tactically he was a disaster, but he was a nice guy. You couldn't help but to like him. Goofy as the day is long, but a nice guy. I didn't like the idea of nominating someone who became famous because of another party. Does that make sense? it felt like we were outsourcing. Like we couldn't handle our own shit. So we had to get someone from outside the party to help us out. That's how it felt. I know that's an exaggeration. He had joined the party, blah, 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 blah. But you get my point, is that's kind of how it felt. And I fear that's how it looked to the rest of America, because that's how he was introduced. Libertarian Party nominee Gary Johnson, former Democratic governor of New Mexico. Republican.
Right.
I beg your pardon. As though it mattered.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. But as though it mattered. Right. That's an issue. That's an issue. And those are some of the things that worry me. Right? You know, if you can overcome all those things, then terrific. But I do believe that we need to push in a certain identification direction. What do you all worry about?
Well, the foreign policy is the big thing that made me leave the Republican Party, and that's what I joined. Because when I got out of the Navy, I started to look, because I happened from 2000 to 2006.
Yeah.
So then you start looking at what John McCain was, you know, and the whole 9/11, you know, and I was one of the guys that was back. Oh, well, the Patriot Act. Who cares?
When were you in?
2000 to 2006. So Patriot Act was.
And thank you for your service.
You're welcome.
That could not have been an easy time.
Well, I was on a sub. I had a good time, but
You had a good time on a submarine.
Oh yeah, it was a blast. But that's a whole nother story.
That's a much more interesting story than me. All right, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah. But when I got out and I saw the foreign policy, and then like the Patriot Act, the NSA, things to that nature, that kind of bothered me that I was blindly just following what my leaders said, you know. So my question.
Well, you're a patriot, and people manipulate our patriotism.
Oh, absolutely, and
Yeah.
that's what angers me. And then you start looking back, the Vietnam vets, and you know, so World War II, so many things have taken place because it wasn't because we were doing foreign policy things that led to people going into power that shouldn't have made it to power. You know.
Oh yeah,
that
absolutely.
Just frustrates me. So when you say I'm going to act a war, declare war, that's great. You say you're going to get the states to do it. Are you going to give like a certain time limit? Would you say like how long would you say?
You have all the time you want.
Okay, I
You
didn't
can't
know.
get the votes. You can't get the votes.
Okay, because you know I remember when one of the questions, and I know I keep bringing up Ken Armstrong, but in 2020, one of
We
the
all
guys,
like Ken. That's okay.
one of the and he had this great point because this person said, you know, let's bring all the troops home. He said that we have treaties with some bases, a lot of bases we just have agreements.
Oh yeah, it's hard to close some of them.
And he would immediately.
It's hard to close almost all of them.
Right, but he said with the treaties would be hard. It's the ones that you just have the agreement. So he would tell Congress, you've got 45 days. Either give me a treaty or they're coming out.
You know how you handle it is you have a list of facilities inside the United States. And you have a list of facilities outside the United States. And you go to each senator and you show them both lists. Here's the stuff in your state. That's what I'm going to work on closing unless you help me with this list. And they become real cooperative. All of a sudden, you know, that fuel depot in Kuwait doesn't look so essential anymore compared to my army base in Kansas City. You get my point.
Oh, absolutely. Now, how are you going to fight the military-industrial complex? Because
slowly.
I mean, that's a nightmare. You know, and I know Trump did.
I would allow them to sell to virtually anybody, but not funded by the U.S. government when they do it.
Okay.
In other words, if the Israelis want to buy, they can buy, right? But it's got to be on their own dime. Mm-hmm. And I'm not anti-Israel.
No, I got it. You're just using it as an example.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's an important example.
Oh, yeah.
Because we used to give them a lot of money, and we still give them a lot of money. Mm-hmm. and we transfer a lot of arms to them, and they do buy quite a bit at commercial prices, but it's got to be all on their own.
Right.
Which is actually how it should have been. We've done almost everything wrong with Ukraine, but that's a whole hour conversation. But we should have handled that very, very differently from the get-go. You know, starting 10 years ago, we've screwed that place up.
Right.
And I do believe that NATO is an example of having screwed up a lot of things.
Would you get out of the UN too, you think?
Yes. I think the UN is more embarrassing than NATO. I think NATO is problematic because it obliges us to do dumb things, and it causes us to prevent others from doing things they see in their own interest. We told the Poles to back off because we were afraid that their actions would draw us into the Ukrainian conflict. That's just weird.
Right.
The Polish people decided they wanted to do something that was in their own interest. Now, we could argue that it was a dumb thing they wanted to do. You could argue that it wasn't in their interest, but this is what they decided they wanted to do.
And you could argue it wasn't the Polish people, it was the Polish government.
Yes.
It ain't the people, it's the government. Same with Russia, same with...
Agreed.
Yeah.
But we told them, no, don't, because we're afraid you'll pull us into the conflict.
We shouldn't be involved in conflicts.
Thank you.
Stay the hell out of them.
And that's a NATO problem for the Poles,
My grandfather
not just for us.
World War II, he was the first person to say, we don't need to be going to these damn wars. He was never a libertarian, by no means. He was closer to a Republican than anything I've ever seen.
Yeah.
But his viewpoint of, we don't, as a military person, we don't need to be in these countries. China and Russia are going to be the ones that are going to screw us at the end of the day.
That's right.
God damn, if it ain't happening, like, it's literally going like the way he said it.
Yeah.
My
Yeah,
grandma
yeah.
was
You
saying,
can
like,
see
stay
it
out of
coming
conflict.
from a mile away.
My mom would always say, stay out of conflict. So that's the one libertarian thing my mom don't vote at all. I've been trying to get her for years.
Yeah.
I've swung my brother, I've swung my mom, my dad to vote libertarian because they're starting to see why
Yeah.
I do what I do.
Yeah.
I've been a libertarian from 2008 and then
Yep.
card carrying since 2013.
Yep.
But now being through a lot of the steps of being up to the state level chair, I can say, like, and being a candidate, I can say, I know how hard it is to get our message across. And if you don't have a good message,
And if you don't have air cover from your presidential nominee.
that's one of the best things you said. Like, no, Brian says it all. I don't say keep beating on Brian because me and Brian know him for a long time, since 2013, and good friend. But good point he makes. Without airtime of something, you're not getting the visibility for. It's not easy to get the airtime if you're a local candidate. But if the national candidates were doing it, it would be easier for us to get it because we get more donations from the public because they would know more about the Libertarian Party.
Bingo.
That's the biggest thing. As
Bingo.
a local candidate, as a House of, running for the House of Delegates in the state of Virginia,
Yep.
if I had a presidential candidate that ran ads and they knew who the Libertarian Party was,
Make a huge difference.
Yeah.
I'm gonna tell you, I changed a lot of Republicans' minds at the polls that I was working.
Yeah.
People that were never voted for another party ever in their life, and I had them voting for me.
Yeah.
Okay, that's big.
Good for you. And thank you for doing it.
And what I see,
Tremendous amount of work.
it is
For no personal satisfaction whatsoever.
No, a lot of stress, and I was running the state party at the same time. So I pretty much drove myself to deep into the wall. But
Yeah.
I'll do it again, and I'm going to run for.
Well, it's because none of us are very smart. We don't learn, we just
Somebody
do it
needs
again.
to-
We have to take a breather, but then we're right back at it.
Yeah, you can say I kind of took a breather for a few months, but at the end of the day, I'm going to get back into a damn thing. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to go back even more local and say this is where you're screwing up. I had an idea with and this, you could use this maybe nationwide on a candidate. The idea we have broadband towers that they put up, right?
We have what?
Broadband towers.
Towers, yeah.
So
I thought you said broadband powers, and I was like, that sounds interesting.
So broadband towers, they put them in different places.
Yeah.
They get paid rent, right?
Yeah.
I'm a firefighter.
Uh,
Fire and EMS could have them on the volunteer could have them on their property, get
Yeah.
paid rent.
Yeah.
Then your cost of your taxpayer goes
Yeah.
down.
Yeah.
Okay? That's how I was trying to lower taxes.
I get it. Good
Right?
for you.
And it was a very popular thing. And
Uh huh. Did you get picked up by the other parties? The idea?
they're trying to, and they're trying to get me give them more information. And I'm like, not yet. I want to work with whoever the people are. I mean, if I have to work with a Republican to get something that I had a good idea to,
Yeah.
I'm
No, good for you.
more power to it. The county I lived in, the district was run by an independent for literally 20 some years. It was an independent, and he got reelected over Republicans, Democrats every day of the week. So that was something that made me like, I want to jump into this race because I think that we had a shot. Problem is, the Democrat jumped in, and that screwed the pooch when it comes to when it was just a Republican versus me. I would have a much higher percentage of votes.
Yeah.
I also, school choice was a big thing. Most people don't know about school choice. I went to a rally where I was not a speaker, but it was about school choice. And I went up there because I wanted to just listen to them.
Sure.
And I asked to speak and I told them I was from this district.
Yeah.
They allowed me to speak.
Get your 5 minutes.
I got my 10 minutes.
Wow.
And
In Palm Beach, I only got 3 minutes. I got
district-
ripped off.
That district, so that district itself, they bought rhino. Like, I didn't have enough of my signs to go around, but they got rhino signs, a rhinoceros, because Republican and
Yeah.
They stuck that on every one of the other guys. The guy I was going against, Republicans, signs.
Good for you.
Well, like when we were in Benton last year, so the three of us were at a table, and there was a news crew just walking around. So we sent Dean over there.
Yep.
Got himself on air for a few minutes.
I know people in the media, so that's the other thing, and it pisses me off because some of the media, mainly meteorologists, so they're really not. I don't consider them like the bad media people, but they're not because a lot of them are actually independently minded people. A couple.
Oh,
of
I'm
them
sure.
Are more libertarian than I'd ever believe.
Right.
Weatherman, Will Stafford, Brent Watt, both of them guys are actually very libertarian in a lot of their thought process. The thing is, they can't say that on air because they're unfortunately part of the corrupt media. Like the Joe DeShiel guy with the LPBA, like Holly talk, but they don't want to hear anything from people that are actually know more about it and know that you can't do that and
Right.
illegal it is.
Right.
And they don't want to get you on the news. Okay. When they want to get you on the news, but they don't have no problem doing that. Putting that crap on the news. So,
It can be very frustrating, no?
I'll tell anybody I'll run for office. Running for office is very, I don't know how to put it, satisfying because I was helping spread the message for everybody here that maybe doesn't want to run for office.
Right. It's definitely a public service, running for office.
Yep.
Yeah, you don't do it, certainly as a libertarian, you don't do it for yourself.
As a firefighter, as a volunteer fireman, I don't do it for myself. I do it for the people that in my community.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly right.
I'm not self-centered or an asshole to do that. Like, the other thing is, let us know what, for me personally, let me know what you need for your campaign. And would you be, if, say they get one of the big guns, like Hamas or whatever to run, would you run for vice president?
No.
You don't believe it?
Amash?
I mean, if it was like Larry Sharp said.
Larry Sharp's a different animal.
Yeah, I just think if you didn't get the nomination, Larry
I would probably wash Larry's car.
Okay. Because I'm just asking because I think you're very well spoken. I think you have great ideas, and I think you will do well. But if you have them supporting one of them, it's very hard for a smaller candidate or somebody that's not doing well.
Agreed. I think
That's my biggest problem.
Yeah. No. I totally get it. A couple of things worth mentioning. Things are going to change a lot. We have a year and a half until the nomination.
Yep.
Things are going to change a great deal. The name recognition deficit I have now will not be so bad in 18 months as it is now.
So I guess my other question would be, if you didn't get the nomination, you're in a state, would you run for like governor or something?
No.
What?
No. I would probably do this again. I would probably do this again.
I would just look for honest answers out of people.
Yeah. And regarding the other candidates, I do see Larry as being a different animal from some of the others. You touched a hot button for me. I got a lot of respect for Larry.
I do too. I love Larry Sharp.
I had a long heart-to-heart with him just a couple weeks ago at the New York convention. And he really opened my eyes to, I mean, I had known him, you know, and you chit chat, and I'd done a show a couple of times. So I knew he's a nice guy, he's a smart guy. I've been following the stuff he's accomplished in New York. But let me just say, he's the real deal. He's the real deal. I don't know whether the American public would accept him as a credible threat to go all the way.
They should.
Again, because our party lacks a history of public service. At least he was in the service, right? And that matters a lot, especially if you're a libertarian, because I do believe that we need to avoid stepping on our message, if you know what I mean. For example, I spend a lot of time talking about criminal justice reform and changing the way that we manage police officers and ending the war on drugs. I spend a lot of time talking about that. It helps me have that conversation because I've spent most of the last 12 years as a cop. Without that, it comes across too blue. A lot of cops have a hard time listening to me because I can be pretty rough on the police establishment.
Should be.
But I'm actually quite pro-cop. I'm just quite anti the way we manage cops. And in the long run, what most cops don't realize is in the long run, if we change things, it would benefit them. It wouldn't benefit the crappy cops, but it would benefit the good ones.
See, I'm pro. That's what asked me. Says you're pro cop. You just said it in your thing for running for supervisor. I'm like, yeah, I think they should get more money, and I'm telling you why. We should get more money for the cops,
And fire the bad
firefighters,
ones.
and all that, right? But here's the thing. Not all cops are bad. There's ways of doing things, i.e., don't buy tanks to raise
That's
somebody
right.
for marijuana.
That's right.
Use them for the absolute worst case scenario. And that's how you should respect cops. That's how the libertarians should respect cops.
That's right.
Because if you do things by the book and aren't trying to take away their rights, you do it by the Constitution,
Right.
you're not really an enemy.
That's right. But in my view, we need to make it more like other industries.
As a fireman,
Hi.
as a fireman, that's all the same.
Can I pass these around?
Hal,
They're paid for.
Since your background in law enforcement, qualified immunity.
We need to end qualified immunity and replace it with public sector liability insurance, just like other high liability businesses. The most prominent example being surgeons, right?
Yeah.
It's telling someone, we screwed up, but you have no redress in court. I just find that un-American.
Yeah.
And I recognize that at the granular level, it wouldn't change all that much in the sense that insurance companies would be on the hook instead of the city. But we need to get away from the enormous deference shown police officers in court. Because it's not just qualified immunity. Qualified immunity actually doesn't affect as many cases as you might think. But the courts give virtually carte blanche. And I think that we need to get away from that. There's always going to be some of that. I mean, I get it. You know, a cop is an expert, a sworn
vetted.
servant. His job is to tell the truth. There's lots of reasons why cops are naturally always going to get some deference in court. But we have gone way off the deep end in that regard. At the very least, we need to be like the medical profession. We don't cut off someone's leg by mistake and say, well, I didn't mean to, suck it up, right? And if you're bad at your job, you're going to get priced out of the market. That's the way it should be. The big advantage, hi, Mike.
I met you at the state convention. We sat next to
You look so familiar. Yes! Now I remember. Thank you for that. The big reason why getting a third party involved, getting a private sector liability insurance carrier involved, is that they wouldn't put up with the bullshit of the unions. unions make it very difficult to achieve any kind of transparency, to find out what's going on in particular cases, even if it's a case with which you're involved. Unions, preclude all kinds of disciplinary measures, and to the extent to which there is discipline, it's completely opaque. They just thwart efforts to hold police accountable and information about that. And a private sector liability insurance carrier is not going to put up with that. If you don't give us the information we want, you're not going to get insured. And by the way, if your department doesn't discipline for things that we don't like, we're not going to insure anyone in your department, right? I don't give two hoots about your union contract. Your union contract ain't my problem. But it's the unions that keep local politicians from being able to do the things that we think that they ought to do. In my town, where I worked for 11 and a half years on the road, we decided who the mayor was going to be. We had a mayor that we really liked. She was pro-cop. She wouldn't give us a hard time. The FBI took her away one day. That was very discouraging. But the good news is we didn't have to do it, right? They did it. They took her away. And we made a woman mayor who cleaned bathrooms for a living.
Okay.
And she ran a business doing it, right? She had other women working for her. So she was we positioned her as a local business person. And we brought her to power. And then when the FBI dropped the charges against our previous favorite, we dumped her and brought in the next one. This is not an exaggeration. We were the only political force in little town, right? 25, 30,000 people. We decided. We had 100 officers, and we decided what was going to go. Now, when it comes time to negotiating the next union contract, all the things you might expect a politician to say were not said, right? I'm sitting there waiting for her to say, or her representative, her attorney to say, I want greater accountability and transparency. I want to be able to pay the good ones more and the bad ones less and evaluate everyone. I want to be involved in training, and I want to be able to fire someone just because I don't like the way they comb their hair, right? I mean, surely she has a TV. She knows the way politics are going in the United States. Not a peep. We say we want a 5% raise. She says, I'll give you 2. So we compromise at 3.5. And I'm waiting for, and nada. That's why we need to get rid of qualified immunity and get an insurance carrier involved to do the things that local politicians just can't, won't.
So how does as a
Can I pass this around?
sure as an advertising, a campaign is basically an advertisement,
Yes, sir.
and biography is an integral part of that. How
Yes,
does
sir.
an economist become a cop?
By going to the police academy. But your question, I think, is probably deeper than that.
Right.
I'd always wanted to be a cop. When I was in grad school in the 1800s, I took the police entrance exam in Washington, D.C. when I was at GW, and just decided it didn't pay enough. I'm not terribly proud of the way I made that decision.
Well,
I mean, I wanted to raise a family,
Yeah.
and and just decided I'm going to stay in school. Fast forward 20 years, I'm 49 in those days, and decided I wasn't getting any younger, and do it now or don't do it at all. I had just wrapped up a business with a partner of mine. We merged our little company into another business, and I was teaching economics at a couple of local universities, and kind of thinking it's now or never. As difficult as it was at 49, I figured it would have been even more difficult at 55 or 60. And so I worked as a cop from age 49 to 60 until 11 months ago. My certification will expire here in about 3 weeks. And then my wife will breathe a sigh of relief because I keep teasing her I can still get a job in the next 3 weeks.
It's fun. Today actually happens to be my 49th birthday. So you noted.
Happy birthday.
You,
Time to go to the police academy.
I won't say.
You seem in good shape.
Well, we'll try. You noted. I don't think it was a harsh criticism, but you noted that Jurgensen was coming from an academic background.
Yeah.
And that wasn't necessarily the best of tool sets for.
Well, not only was it academic, but it wasn't involved in public policy.
Okay.
She's
So-
an industrial psychologist.
So my question would be, how convince me that you, as an economist, are not an academician? That you don't carry that same.
Well, I've worked for the White House. I've worked for other
Okay.
public sector agencies. I spent 20, probably not, I should probably count them. I don't think it was quite 20 years in Washington, but a lot of years in Washington around the congressional and legislative process. I worked as a free market advocate in the banking industry for quite a few years before having my own business. So I've been around a couple of different blocks.
Okay.
And I would say, including working in the banking industry for a few years, I would say I know a lot about how that part of the world works. It is as ugly as you might think. It's not attractive. But an appreciation for how that works, I think, is important. I think the American public expects that. The other thing I would say is that coupled with my 11 and a half years as being a cop, I think is a result of my commitment to public service. I take public service very seriously. I know what it means, when I see fellas who have been in the service. I was not in the service, so I do not presume to understand all of the experiences that you guys had, right? But I know the feeling that is required to make that leap of faith. And it is a leap of faith, because before you became a Marine, you didn't know. You didn't know even what you didn't know. Now you know things you wish you could forget.
Or see things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Being in public service also, the environment, we've seen stuff that most people won't ever see.
I'm painfully aware. And, as a cop, not only have I seen things I wish I could forget, I've seen things I wish I didn't know. Things I wish weren't true, like the way police officers are trained. And I understand why, but we instill fear in police officers that wouldn't have otherwise been there. And it's what leads to a lot of problems. I don't like to talk about specific cases because invariably you end up wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But we've all seen cases where a cop has done something seemingly utterly violent without justification.
Shooting dogs.
And people. And in a certain proportion of those cases, they truly are unjustified. It does happen, right? It doesn't happen as often as the public thinks, but it happens a lot more often than we wish it would. A certain proportion of those are because cops are fearful. They're trained to fear. And they're trained on the mantra of, I'm going home for dinner. Maybe someone else isn't, but I am. That my life is the most important one out there. I don't know exactly how to look a young man in the eye and say, no, it's not. That's a hard conversation to have and still recruit people. So I don't know exactly how to finesse that.
Well, I feel like it's basically the exact opposite of how the police want the average citizens to
Bingo.
treat the police.
Bingo. There's a mismatch there.
Yes, they want you to trust every officer, but they don't.
But then they
want the
train them to
officers
be fearful
trust.
and selfish. And that's a problem. I think it's especially disappointing because people don't become police officers because they're fearful and selfish. right? I mean, on the whole. I mean, every once in a while you run into a schmuck. But on the whole, people go into public service and most other endeavors in life on a leap of faith. Either a great deal or at least a smidgen of courage and swallowing some of the things that you might, have second thoughts about or about which you might be fearful. And then you get into the police academy and we teach people to fear as a way of making police officers careful. And of course, it's because the training is put forward by the employers who don't want you getting killed because it'll cost them money, and because police officers believe that it's the best way to control situations, is to always be on edge. I would disagree. I was a training officer for several years. It helps to have gray hair if you're a cop. It's one thing I learned. It's a young person's sport, but it helps to have gray hair.
Is it just that we got too many cops? I grew up in a small town in northern Wisconsin. We had a neighboring town, Land O'Lakes. They had the same sheriff for 40 years, and I could, 16, sit at the bar and have a beer with them, no problem. And we only had, it was like one deputy and a sheriff.
Yeah.
No problem. But I come down here and everyone's uptight, and the cops, and everyone's worried about getting pulled over or getting tickets for no reason in the yard. They did anything back home.
Well, you do bring up an interesting point with the tickets. There are towns motivated by ticket revenue. That does happen. Not in all places, obviously, and I don't even know if it happens in most places, but in some places, that's a real thing. There are traffic cop departments that are considered, revenue positive and therefore well-funded. I don't know if it's too many or too few. Polling data suggests that people, whether white or black or rich or poor, people want either the same level of policing as they have now or more, interestingly. It is not true, notwithstanding what CNN would lead you to believe, it is not true that Americans are anti-cop. They want things to be different and managed better. They don't want the accidental violence or the hair trigger violence, all the problems that we could identify.
They want to be safe, but they don't want to have the aggressive cops, basically.
Yeah, which is a good overlap for us. It's not, interestingly, a good overlap for the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. This should be in our wheelhouse. Republicans knee-jerk support cops. And I don't think that that's an intelligent or sufficiently nuanced way to... I'm pro-cop, but I'm very pro-reform. We need to make fundamental changes. I think Republicans fail to recognize that and to take advantage of what could be in their wheelhouse a little bit, and Democrats especially. This defund the police movement was moronic on their part. Not only was it bad politics, but it's a silly idea. And it's not one that people could embrace.
If you want to see it in real life, go to Camden, New Jersey. That's what happens when you
Yeah. And by the way, don't go to Camden, New Jersey.
I used to live in New Jersey, so I can help.
Yeah, I did too. I lived in Morristown, which was lovely, but we didn't go to Camden.
Morristown South.
Morristown.
Fort Worth.
Yeah.
I was in Southern. That's why I was.
Yeah.
Burlington County.
Nice. Well, it's nice out there. So this ought to be in our wheelhouse. Police reform, it's a nice dovetail with criminal justice reform. It's a nice dovetail with ending the war on drugs, right? It's a nice package for us that we can handle much better than Republicans and Democrats. It's a good one for me personally, being a cop, right? It's a good one for me personally, but it ought to be for any libertarian a better fit than for a Republican or a Democrat. Anything give you a heartburn?
Everything sounded good. What I'm going to do is we'll go on and wrap it up. Please stay around. You can still keep talking, but we'll cut the video.
I have to go home.
Oh, you can always hang out.
I could.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, let's all thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you.
for
I really
coming up
appreciate
here.
it. Thanks for letting me join
Yeah,
y'all.
absolutely, and thanks to Keith and RT Delis for opening up their shop so we could speak.
Yeah, we
let Mike speak.
He
here.
doesn't run this in a
So,
charity, does he? We got to give him some money, don't we?
You would actually.
Oh well, we're paying. We're paying for his food, so it's all good. I've got you covered. So that's it. So thank y'all so much for coming out.
I better make a donation
And,
to the cause.
That's it.
All right, that was Mike to Maat. Once again, thank you for coming and speaking to us. I also want to thank RT Smith's Deli for allowing us to use his facility to hold our business. So that's about it. If you're ever interested in joining us, please come down second Wednesday of each month. If you go to rvlp.org, or you can go to our Facebook page, join our, get on our email list, all that good stuff, so you'll always know when we have events going out. But, just to wrap it up really quick, Mike did a really good job. And for those that think the Libertarian Party of Virginia is no longer a thing, well, sorry, but it's not going nowhere. So until next time, my friends, I'm Brian, the chair of the Roanoke Valley Libertarians, and I'll see you soon.